let's make a start. Colleagues, I am so thrilled to see you so close to Christmas through so many of holidays around the world. Alison's joined us. She's just done, what was it, 18 hours of marking AW? Sound on, baby. You can leave the sound on. There's only a few of us.
Something, yeah, more like 17, an hour less.
17. Well, we are thrilled in the middle of the night that you've joined us from the United Kingdom. It's a wonderful international grouping. Yes, Aidan Cornelius Bell is back with us. We are excited. And I know Leanne McRae, Dr. Leanne McRae, has a whole fan group that follows her around the world. So they're all appreciating the green and the glasses. So look, colleagues, this seminar is a special one. It's a reading group seminar, and it's focused on a book called The Death of the Left, Why We Must Begin from the Beginning Again, written by two remarkable, inspirational professors, Simon Winlow and Steve Hall. My respects to them both. And Aidan, I think you're seeing what I'm seeing too. The wonderful Liam is coming in. We are thrilled. So Manchester is well represented. The North is well represented today. So, colleagues, I would also like to present an acknowledgement of country, acknowledging the traditional owners of all the lands on which we meet today, elders past, present and emerging, and any Indigenous colleagues with us today. And we certainly do have an Indigenous colleague with us today, which is tremendous. And look, where I'd like to start, and it is interesting, isn't it, Leanne, that I've started with an acknowledgement of country. I don't think Simon and Steve would agree with me and starting with an acknowledgement of country, but I have, and we may return to that. But colleagues, if I could start, I'd like to start with the notion of the working class and working class people, if I can, and provoke you to work through that phrase. Now, the book really starts with an exploration of Hillary Clinton's The Deplorables, a basket of deplorables, and that phrase to describe the working class. And the gentleman asked very strongly, why aren't we talking about the working class? And they talk about, quote, the discomfort caused by the phrase, the working class, the discomfort caused. So, Aidan, I wouldn't mind you and I starting off with this party. You've been an activist for the bulk of your career. Your parents are activists. You've been involved in the union movement. Do you feel or believe, or have you got an evidential base you'd like to summon about the working class and discomfort?
No. Look, I think that for me, there's to go down the activist road a bit. I feel as though there's almost a middle classness to being in an activist position, potentially in contemporary, you know, like the last sort of 10 years. Yes. You know, it was almost to sort of steal a phrase, colonized in a sense by that aspirant middle class to progress issues that I think, you know, really come out of that sort of fractured left idea. Yes. And then, yeah, almost create a platform for, in a sense, attention seeking. And so I think that's actually, to an extent, disenfranchised that working class that were perhaps more mobile and even just sort of, you know, working class union folk were sort of alienated by that theft, I guess, of their sort of methods of responding to political trends and sort of pushing for better conditions and lives and what have you. So I think that there's actually in that space, there was that sort of separation of the working class and the middle class. They kind of were divided because of the tools of activism, in a sense. So I think it's a bit complex, but.
No, I think that's, so we're going to go there. So you're in many ways agreeing with them on the fragmentation of the left argument, and you've added a layer and level that they didn't go to, that Simon and Steve didn't go to, about activist methods. I love that. Could you give us like one example of a method you think that either created discomfort in the working class or actively configured a diminishing of working class experiences?
Yeah, I think really it was just a departure of what issues were being represented in protest, because it was, at first, I think, you know, if you think about the sort of the 1960s student movements in particular, there was a lot of that very radical left allyship that I think they kind of called themselves, of saying, you know, we're going to stand up. I think, like, thinking about Flinders as a context, you know, Flinders really allied with workers in the Mitsubishi factory and things like that down at Tonsley, you know, like, so they thought that they were kind of amplifying those issues for workers by saying, oh, well, we're going to bring an intellectuality to this, and we're going to bring essentially our middle classness to this space and try and amplify your problems. But then some ideological people got involved in that and took it in a new direction, which kind of like, well, the workers were going, we want to be mobilized around issues that are affecting us, like, you know, our pay or our conditions or insecure housing or things like that.
Yes.
And these ideological individuals that were sort of that more educated or more, you know, more financially stable and so on, took things in even just a slightly different direction, and it created enough division in there for there to be this sort of identification of almost the semi-intellectual, you know, student body as actually you're just a reproduction of our managers, our CEOs, our bosses, and that kind of thing. And it created enough, just a tiny, tiny division, because it might have just been a couple of the words that they used were a bit too, you know, middle classy, and it created that fracture, and it just created enough space that then I think it dispossessed the working class of methods that they'd sort of held on to.
And look, Aidan, we're going to come back to that. You've raised everything there, the notion of the common good that we're going to return to, fragmentation that we're going to return to. But I just want to quickly go to Alison, if I can, because, you know, Alison and I suppose, have come from a working class background moving into academic life. And Alison, there's that great phrase that Simon and Steve use, never before in our lifetimes have we witnessed so many leftists denounce ordinary working people. Now, Alison, through your life and experience inside and outside universities, was there an accuracy or a resonance there for you?
Yeah, and I think, and I apologise now, actually, I haven't read the whole book because I've been trying to get through it this week, so there may be some bits that I know nothing about. But to be honest, I think I have, and you probably know this as much as anybody, a really big chip on my shoulder about that. I mean, I'm quite keen, even though I don't agree with everything she says, I'm quite keen of the work on the work of Liza McKenzie, and she's also quite angry about that way that actually, you know, going back to the very first thing you started with, working class people as deplorable. There's just, it does feel like there's constant shaming, and to be honest, throughout my activist life, I've been in several areas of politics, mostly socialist, but also green and things. And I always end up departing because it feels like not me, not individual. It's not an individual one, but people like me aren't necessary. Our ideas aren't useful or considered useful, and yeah, I think that's a huge problem, and not just in politics either, in culture and all sorts of other areas. So sorry, I haven't really added anything, but no, that's my opinion.
Because you've captured the disgust in response, the despair or the marginalisation at its very least. Amazingly said. And I know both Nick and Liam are on the call too. Good afternoon, good evening, good night to you. How are you, Nick?
Good. Sorry, I'm on.
You are, mate. Oh, you darling, you've just muted yourself. You were right the first time.
Yeah, sorry, I'm late. Apologies.
No, it's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Are you well?
Yeah, all right, good. Well rested. I didn't watch the World Cup. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, Aidan, you've really let the sartorial side down. Look at a bit of tie work for an online seminar. Thanks for playing. So thank you. Wonderful to have you here. And Liam, how are you, Liam? Are you well? You're both muted and the video, mate. So if you just want to say hi. Wonderful.
He said in the chat he was having mic issues.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you might want to go in and out, Liam. We're thrilled to have you here. Look, colleagues, something I'm excited about, and this was new for me, and I suppose this is going to be the Leanne and Tara bit of this conversation, is about identity politics being the cultural rendering of neoliberalism, if you will. So in other words, we've had all this competitiveness, this hyper-competitiveness, individuals, agency, choice, lack of regulation, and the version of neoliberalism that exists in our societal configuration, instead of communitarian good, is now individuals fighting with each other to see who's had the most deplorable or debilitating oppression. So all of a sudden, the expression of oppressions becomes a competitive configuration. And Leanne, I'm loving this phrase, rainbow capitalism, that was described in this book on page 124. Changed my life. I'm going to get a t-shirt. Thanks for playing rainbow capitalism. Quote, corporate America can get behind the cause of racial and gender equality and a broad range of LGBTQ plus issues precisely because they are cultural issues and they don't impede profitability. End of quote. So they're lovely ticker box things like, yes, we're neoliberal, we've no regulation at all, but you know what? We're doing good in the women business, and yep, we are gay friendly. So this is like a neoliberalism pretty well gone mad that's now about hierarchizing our identities and our oppressions. Leanne, did that speak to you as loudly as it did to me?
Absolutely. I think that's at the crux of what we're discussing here. I think it's this removal of the economy from the discussion, you know, that just underpins, all of this idea that the economy will take care of itself, that the free market is the free market and it sits over here and we can't mess with it, we can't talk about it, it's just going to roll on and do what it does, and that is fair and equitable. That's the key component to that whatever it does will be fair and equitable. So all of your other conversations about fairness and equitability have to happen over here. And therefore, because you can't talk about the way in which the economic relationships underpin and frame and define and motivate and propel that inequality, you can't ever actually have a meaningful, changeable, radical conversation in those spaces. And instead it ends up being about celebrating, which is not a problem at all. We absolutely should celebrate, these elements of diversity. But at the end of the day, the celebration / celebrity, to kind of, roots of those words there, ends up being, for me at least, very vacant, very empty, very, not that the economy is everything though, but at the same time, because you've removed that key component from the discussion, it ends up.
Can I push you though, because obviously there's arguments. Economic determinant. I'm very comfortable with the economic determinant. I always have been. I'm sort of old-fashioned like that. I'm an Alzarian, talk to the hand. But I wonder if, and the boys do this very strongly nearing the end of the book, about the competition between identity groups, right? And this spoke to me very, very strongly. So we live in an era, and maybe we might be partying on with you in a second, but Leanne, the idea that we've now got TERFs, and when in doubt, call someone a TERF, and then that's okay. And then we got this Karen thing. So a chick that complains is a Karen, right? And, we've all got a lot of Karens in our lives in the benevolent fashion. But so for me, I'm always interested in this because the notion of when you use a TERF or you've got particular language, I always love to term myself like a trans-exclusive radical Marxist. It's interesting, we don't have sort of terms around, we just have the TERFs. But I wonder, Leanne, does that worry you? Because that's what I feel. I feel like everyone's now competing. So we go to a meeting and it's like, who has the best narrative to explain that culture has impacted on them the most, that their life is the worst of anybody in this room. Are you feeling that?
Oh, absolutely. This has become the space where experience, rather than being able to interpret that experience into a critical position, has become the only thing that carries meaning. And that's because of capitalism, because everything in capitalism is about your experience as a consumer. And that translates across everything. And we're seeing it now with, when we go back to the working class decision or discussion about when we've got strikes right now, it's about the inconvenience of that to everybody else. you know, and that's the narrative that is pushed out as a result of this. You know, and that's about you are a consumer, and therefore your ease and your smooth moving through your life is the thing that caters to you the most. And if you can frame that in a way that, in a sense, mobilizes and politicizes your victimhood, your victim, your space as a victim, that seems to be the only, because that's connected to harm and therefore deviance, and that's the only thing we care about anymore.
Oh my Lord. And also, Leanne, we're hearing this new phrase that's emerged in the last couple of years, punching up and punching down. And we hear about that a lot, particularly in popular culture and comedy circles. And I'm always interested that people are so certain about that they're punching up or they're punching down, that they're that certain about their position in the hierarchy.
Yeah, I don't quite know what to say about that. That baffles me quite a bit. And I think that's connected to, you know, this idea of cancel culture, which I have remained completely flabbergasted, which I think is connected, you know, which is about the populism, you know, debate.
And the idea that it's okay to sort of hurt anybody. Yes. Common good.
Well, no, I think it's about managing your victimhood. I think it's about, I think what's happening is because this is where identity politics has fallen down, because what has happened is that we've had all this narrative about, you know, gender equality, you know, all of this kind of stuff. But actually, at the end of and institutions, you know, they push out the narrative of, oh, we're conscious, and yes, you should complain to HR if all this happens, and da 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 da. But at the end of the day, those institutions fail because they don't actually implement their own policies. They don't the people who are these perpetrators, the people who are behaving badly, get on. They do fine. And so what happens is people are like, well, we're gonna deploy our mob culture to get our justice.
Wow, that's exactly right. That is so powerful, Leanne. And look, I saw Nick, before I go to Maeve, I saw Nick nodding through that. Nick, have you got a commentary on the notion of the hierarchy of identity? Where are you on this, Nick? And darling, you're on mute.
Yeah, I haven't read the book. I'm just sort of taking it in quite passively, diligently taking notes, as opposed to where I am in the hierarchy. I mean, I'm not terribly well off financially, and I guess my political sort of drive just comes from a sense of, you know, equality for all and well-being for all.
Well said.
Mainly the addressing of poverty is probably my most primary concern. Yeah.
Yes, and well said. We're going to be coming through poverty in and through that. And of course, as Alison and I have talked about in our previous lives, the feminisation of poverty as well. So when we're dealing with poverty, of course, they're female-headed households with all the consequences of that as well. So Nick, very, very well done. And we're going to come back there. But Maeve, have you got a commentary on the identity politics hierarchy before we maybe go to colonisation and then patriarchy?
What do I think? I think that while we're stuck in, like, I don't know whether I'm not 100% certain whether I am okay with being economic determinist entirely, but I am very interested in that. And all my life I've been, in fact, all my life I've been an activist, except for a couple of years where I had 3 children under a very young age. The rest of the time I've been out marching in the 70s, marching in the 90s, didn't stop. Anyway, I think that, oh no, it's a bit cliched, but I think we need like a marriage. You know, I think the economics and the materialism of life are number one. So like Nick said, if you're in poverty, you're not thinking about anything else.
No.
It's so consuming. And then on the other hand, everything that's been layered in, it's like a subterfuge that makes us look away from materialism. And all of those things are like equally important because we're all in that now. Like
Yes.
if we've had the conversation in the 70s or the 80s, well, it wasn't all so clear cut, but we've all lived through now the whole sort of new cultural identity of where, you know, it's a very complicated world, the identity politics. But I don't think we can take it away. And I think that part in the book is a kind of almost like a naivety. I can't think of a better word, but you know, we can't take it away either. We've all lived through that. We're all changed by that. So I think we're looking to confirm that both things can be true at the same time, and that we need to, you know, as you said about the consensus idea, I think all of those things can be true. It's like both and, you know, I think all of that's true.
So well said. You know, the book is about building back better. It's the end of the left. We build back better. And as you said, you can't unknow what you know. That's the issue. So we've all been through the identity politics arc. And I should probably say, Leanne and I taught for 10 years a course at Murdoch that critiqued identity politics. It talked through identity politics in a reasonably literal way, with the final lecture, how would we describe it, Leanne, as being a course going, we've gone on the journey, and by the way, we need to go back to class. We need to go back to the economic determinant. But as Mavis said, we can't unravel this. If we're building back the left, we have to start from identity politics and find a way to drag it, anchor it back to economics, to wages, to poverty, rather than just endlessly talking about economic growth. Let's talk about, you know, food scarcity. Let's talk about, looking at Alison, energy security in the United Kingdom at the moment. It's just astonishing. But let's go back one area that I think for the Australians and the Kiwis on the call, also for our Canadian and our US colleagues on the call, this is hard for us. I just wanted to drop in for a moment in a conversation about how we align capitalism and colonization, because the Stephen Simon were interesting on this, and they used the line that those of us that live in colonized nations have heard a lot, quote, why should they be held responsible for the crimes committed by men long since dead just because they happen to have been born with the same skin colour, end of quote. And for those of us that have seen those two documentaries series on Meghan and Harry, I know, Alison, you enjoyed it very much, and to see the response to any discussion of race and racism and colonisation and the British Empire, to see the scale of that suggests to me there's a bit of a problem there. I mean, I don't know if Liam can get us on sound or not, or is he still silent? But Alison, do you want to just, from those of us who are looking at the United Kingdom, I lived in the UK for 10 years, the complete blinker to what happened through colonisation and what it's done to the rest of the world is odd to me. Have you got a vibe on that, mate? Alison, Dunn?
Sorry, I just keep turning it off because I am quite noisy. Yeah, I mean, you saw my Facebook post on that, which I knew that when I wrote that, I thought I'm taking a bit of a risk here, which I'm a bit risk averse on Facebook after all the experiences. But yeah, and one of my old school friends, who I hardly remember if I'm honest, but he's actually very wealthy, came out as well, he's very royalist, and he was really quite rude about defriend me now if you want to and all this kind of thing, and and of course he didn't say I'm a racist and I'm a royalist. He wanted to phrase it in terms of, you know, in those individualistic terms that you were talking about. And yeah, there was quite a lot of discontent even from people on the left there, you know, the kind of comments about, well, you would say that because it's confirmation bias, because you want to kind of align yourself with the likes of David Olusoga and all that type of thing. So I found it really interesting to see the kind of discomfort around, you know, I'd seen lots of people condemning it as trash TV, and that made me want to watch it more. And of course, there were elements that were a bit, but but I don't know what you think about that. But I just thought, why is everybody so frightened of this? Which is why I decided to give some time to it. So I'm not sure I answered your question. I am tired, sorry.
Oh, darling, you've done incredibly well. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is there's just a notion that, you know, colonization, I didn't colonize Trinidad and Tobago, therefore I'm not accountable, and I don't gain from what happened in the 19th century. And of course, there's a complete lack of awareness that there's a bunch of peoples around the world that on a daily basis are dealing with the economic injustices caused by systems in, I don't know, New Zealand or Australia, our economic systems being set up to feed back to the United Kingdom. You know, why has New Zealand got so many sheep? Because the United Kingdom required cheap lamb roasts. And to this day, the economy is skewed in that way. So please.
Can I just say something about the kind of intersectionality around the, you know, media coverage of her? Because I mean, it hasn't really, well, it's implicitly being covered, but they've been very careful in that documentary. But I mean, it's about gender, and it is about you know, colonization, racism, but it's also about class. You know, a lot of the things that Boris Johnson said in the media about Meghan were very, very class based. And the kind of what is it? Oh, I've forgotten what they call it now. The Compton type of things and all of that. But sorry, I just want to make another point before we move on, because it wasn't covered as much as I'd hoped it would be in the book, which is about going back to individualism and kind of the disappearance of those class politics. Is that the idea of intersectionality itself, which should be one of our prime tools, has become hyper individualized, in my opinion, and I see it particularly in activist circles. So yeah, so I wanted to drop that in. Might not be on your list, but
no, absolutely right, because intersectionality, we all sort of nod, and it's now become like interdisciplinarity, a box that we tick, and actually that requires incredible intellectual work to balance and create this weave of intersectionality while enabling, you know, the understanding of economics and the economic imperatives and the multiple lenses and how they're ordered. So well said. May, did you want to offer a comment before Ella and I have a conversation about the patriarchy?
Hey, looking forward to that. Yeah, just I'm not muted still, am I?
No, you're great, Del.
No. Okay, thanks. I just wanted to mention what Liam said, because I know he's over there thinking and commenting.
Please do.
And he was talking about the post-neoliberal collapse, I think is what he said, and talking about the strikes and the blackouts. And he mentioned that students can dial a government hotline to complain about their lecturers if they're dissatisfied. So it's so all happening there, and also in the middle of cold winter. Whereas here we've got, you know, it's sort of a weird link that just popped into my head, but there's no mention anywhere of climate change, was there?
Very, very little. And that's the problem with running the industrialization and the industrial working class model when we've got a post-industrial, post-Fordist culture. So that's that thing about, if we're going to bring the left back again, then we have to, again, start from post-industrialization. We have to start from fuel and energy scarcity and work out what the left looks like. We can't hope that the working class jobs are going to return, because the nature of different.
Well, they're going towards AI, aren't they?
Oh, well, and yeah, we all know, I mean, Leanne and I have taught the creative industries arguments for 25 years. And look, they can be neoliberal and atomised and individualised, but they don't have to be. There's some fantastic creative industries work that's about communities and regional development, which I think is where our future will be. So really well said, Maeve. And Liam, you keep going, and Maeve will be your best translator. Brilliant.
I will.
And look, I'm going to read the paragraph that made me sort of cry and sort of laugh. And because I love both these men, I have enormous respect for the authors of this book. I'm so grateful that this book was written. There is one paragraph that made me want to eat my own small intestine. So, Ella, I may get you and I to sort of sort this one out. So here we go, quote. Feminists, for example, are often quick to point out throughout the modern era. Women tend to be financially dependent upon men, were paid at a lower rate, and were often unable to follow their preferred career paths. They were expected to take on the majority of housework and childcare, and were also subject to high rates of domestic abuse. For the most part, they are right. However, an entirely critical account of modern community life is just as flawed as an entirely positive one. We agree again. There is truth in this account, but it is also true that many women lived reasonably happy and worthwhile lives in which their husband was not an oppressor, but a source of support and love. Now that's sort of nice and sort of sweet, but that's really misunderstanding the relationship between capitalism and patriarchy. And if we're going to bring back the left, and remember, patriarchy oppresses men and people with penises. Patriarchy oppresses men as much as it oppresses women, right? And so we really, really need to get this right. So Ella, where are you on how we think about women and economics and the workplace and the future of the left? Have you got a perspective on this, Queen Ella?
Ooh. Yeah, Femina Domestica, right? Yeah. I think the piece, both from that and going back on the colonization piece, that really struck me is thinking through like ontologies, epistemologies, ways of being and knowing, and the fact that our whole structure is in and of itself the house modernity built, and everything fits within that. And I felt like the way that it, as you say, Tara, it used this sort of working class Marxist type model as the vein of the book, or the arc throughout the book. It invisibilizes other ways of being and knowing that are beyond. And I felt like the responses both around the comments of sort of, it's not our burden to bear, colonization happened, not seeing it as an event, like seeing it's a structure. And Kyle White writes about that. And then relating to patriarchy is the same thing. When you look and really unpack feminist, especially in colonial modernity, feminist arguments, they are talking about these fracturings and these different hierarchies. And I think that just breezing through them with these simple kind of, they don't know, it just didn't feel sophisticated enough to me. Like I felt like, okay, you're staying in your box and you're scared to go in the deeper waters.
And also great Marxist scholars who were women and took on the project were forgotten. I'm thinking, and we need to just all have a moment and thank the world that this person exists on the planet. Bev Skeggs, incredibly, and her work as a Marxist who is a woman was incredible. Campbell was another, I thought. And also, Leanne, when they were using the argument that feminism has, I think it was, what was the phrase, a middle-class feel to it, or something, it's like mouth feel, feminists have got a bit of a middle-class feel to it. What about Sylvia Pankhurst? Very easy to talk about Emmeline, very easy to talk about Christabel, but Sylvia spent her life with working class women and making sure that one of the Pankhurst daughters did that as a job. And of course her lover for a period of her life, but a lover work was of course Keir Hardie. And Keir Hardie had a very, very big chapter in this book, and yet the person who he was sleeping with and together trying to create a different sort of Marxist future, that was sort of left out. Interesting, LRA. Oh, I got a nod.
You got a nod and lots of notes.
On far, but you're a rock star. Aidan, have you got a vibe at this point as I'm going to start sort of moving to, I think, I'll start to go to the common good argument. But Aidan, where are you on the sort of masculinity, femininity, keeping the economics at the core, but not ignoring colonization and the injustice of women economically?
Yeah. I think I've had a bit of a weird journey sort of through this, because I started in that almost accidental postmodern space myself, like just sort of being dragged kicking and screaming through that field, I suppose. And then had a, I don't know, sort of self-realization around, the power of economic critiques through a Marxist lens or Gramscian lens from my own sort of view.
Yes.
And I think now having, you know, seeing again the way that capitalism overwrites and infiltrates, even, you know, like I'm doing a lot of work at the moment with Aboriginal academics in our university, and one of the things that they raise a lot is that there's, you know, a lot of Aboriginal people who are being sort of converted quite quickly over to this ontological capitalism, like this perspective of, you know, we need to be full participants in the economy, but ignoring all of the ways that the economy is structured against their participation because it's built on their exploitation. And I think there's something to be said for that, losing, you know, actually by coming into, or, you know, that assimilatory view, you lose a lot in terms of sort of culture and other ways of knowing, being and doing. And I think that that sort of holds quite well for anyone that's been traditionally, I suppose, or still being oppressed by capitalist structures. The assimilatory nature of, you know, like being dragged into capitalism and sort of seeing that as, oh, you know, if I can just fully participate, then I'll get equal rights, or I'll get a say, and I'll get to, you know, but there's no fairness, there's no justice in, you know, capitalist, you know, economies to begin with. And so it's such a, it's so complex because you can't, you're, you know, absolutely right, you can't ignore other ways of knowing, being and doing. You can't ignore you know, marginalized groups or other people at all. And, you know, I think actually you could, certainly with, you know, totally different configurations in the kinds of injustices, that you could actually configure the working class as one of those that sits alongside, you know, let's say Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, working class people, women, you know, anyone who's sort of oppressed and pushed out of that ruling class and then oppressed by a capitalist economy and a capitalist ontology. They all have sort of common elements of that struggle against it. And I think, to me, it just, again, screams unitary, coming together, finding the common elements, and actually negotiating what an economy should or could look like that's not built on exploitation. Like, I think that still sits at the heart of it. And I think that is the lesson of Marxist critique and Marxist politics, is to think about, you know, how do we unite and how do we actually combat this together in a negotiated, co-designed way.
And look, Aidan, it is. And I think we now need to, if we are going again, if we are rebuilding the left, we need to do right what I would argue 200 years of scholars did wrong. And they didn't do the difficult work. And trust me, intellectually, this is nightmarish work to think about capitalism and colonization today. So not only something that actually happened as an historical event, but how those two ontologies engage today, and further thinking about capitalism and thinking about the patriarchy. And this is very difficult work to do. And thinking about, to this day, why it's female-headed households that are confronting poverty, and why are we still fighting for, I mean, for me, we'll never have, as a working class woman, unless you've got equal wages and unless you've got reproductive rights, we can't even start a conversation. Can't even start a conversation. So those two, the notion that reproductive rights should be integral to any rendering of Marxism, I think is incredibly important. And of course was present in Soviet Russia with Alexandra Kollontai, of course, who was a Leninist, was in Lenin's revolution, and wrote a book. And I always love this title, Red Love. Red Love. What does, you know, Marxist love look like? And that's what Alexandra Kollontai did. And she is just about the only Leninist who managed to survive the Stalinist purges. So we learn about, I think, how clever she is on this. But Leanne, have you got a vibe on this before we start to move to the common good, about how we hold this together, how we maybe block a hierarchy that this is more important than this, and we start to weave this situation more elegantly?
This is something I've been, you know, it's such a difficult question. And I think we have to, for a start, going back to, I think, Aidan's point, I think stop configuring entry into the economy as it currently stands as some sort of rite of passage into, I'm now seen, now validated, my voice can be heard. I think to me, that serves as a space of corrosion when and I understand exactly why it happens, because it is the terms of debate now. It is the terms of entry into anything. And we've seen it with this contemporary notion of we've got to get back to normal. And we've had an opportunity, it's fascinating to me to see the opportunity that has just been filtered through our fingers, that we had this, and I'm not trying to, obviously COVID's been very traumatic for a lot of people, and there's been a lot of, it's very, very challenging situation, and I don't mean to make light of it or to diminish that in any way, but there was also an opportunity. It was an opportunity to really look at who we are and how we are organised, a society, and it just frittered away onto the breeze.
Yeah,
that moment.
And I tell you what, Leanne, we're gonna finish with COVID, I think, because I hope it's not over. I hope we're not post-COVID. But at this point, with about 15 minutes left to go, 17 minutes left to go, I thought at this juncture, once we've gone through those lenses that were so important to discuss, let's go where, in many ways, Aidan started us off, and that is thinking about the common good. And, endlessly, we'll just go through the quotes. Quote, willful disregard of universalism and common interest, end of quote, a hierarchy of suffering, end of quote, on page 80, quote, the loss of commitment to the public good on page 9. And on we go, using particularly Keynes. And on page 315, the need to, quote, renew the traditional and apparently forgotten commitment to the public good and the public cause. Okay, now I love this. I believe in this strongly, but let's do this as a family. I believe in a common good and a common goal. Now, what is it? And Leanne, let's start with you. What could that be if we're rebuilding the left?
Oh, handballing me the tough one. Okay.
Well, what could it be? What could hold?
What could it be?
Us all together?
Well, it fundamentally has to be built on an acknowledgement of the exploitative tendencies of the current system and moving forward and diminishing. And I don't think you're going to get necessarily, remove entirely, because there are many complexities within that are far beyond, an ethos or an outlook. It's about the intricacies of interpersonal and, interrelationships, which I think are far more difficult. But I think, as naive as it sounds, equality, this idea of equality, it's in completely, when you say it out loud, people look at you like you're, and even when I say it out of my own mouth, I kind of go, oh, good one, left, good on you. An idea that, and also, the idea of, an individual's efficacy, the right to have your own, which is fun, and this is where we get into the trick, isn't it? This fundamental capitalist notion is it's my own choice, of freedom of choice, and it's like, it becomes this really knotty, messy moment that gets hot, that gets, to use Aidan's phrase before, colonized. It gets, that connection between colonization and capitalism just is this intimate, intricate thing. And I think that's where we need to start unpacking and unpeeling what's happening in that space.
But Leanne, I never understood, Leanne, and I don't to this day, and that's why I'm hoping you can all explain it to me. I've never understood why my individual choice should be more important than the collective good. And let's give you an example of that. Why should me fighting over toilet paper in a supermarket without a mask be more important than public health and public policy? I have never understood that. Maeve, do you want to explain it to me? Why is individual choice now this thing that I can choose to do things that not only hurt myself and hurt my family, but will hurt the culture? Why is that a fighting choice?
Well, Leanne, I got the second handball, so you're all right. I think that several linkers are going on for me. And in the book, there was a distinct saying that they weren't talking about ultra-realism, and yet, yes. And then at the same time, I was thinking, well, what are they talking about then? And then, like, they mentioned individualism, and they didn't go to subjectivities and various things that we know about the ultra-realist, the pseudo-pacification process, and also subjectivities. And yet, I think it's absolutely key to understanding society as we live it. Atomization is a key concept of theirs. They barely touched on that because they were trying to not look ultra-realist. I think they were trying to make a book that was broader than ultra-realism. And so there was a sort of not quite mix there for me, because I thought really if it was sort of like full honesty and what I think it will take to reinvigorate the left, the first thing you've got to do is go, well, actually, we are ultra-realists and we couldn't have written this book unless we had that perspective. Yes. And then it's like calling it, like, you know, and that's kind of the good bit of postmodernism and identity politics, where you're prepared to say, well, this is actually who I am, and I'm going to tell you that's my perspective, and then let's all deal. Let's all put our stuff on the table and let's deal.
Yeah,
so
and well said, Maeve. So in other words, there's got to be that, again, that line between this is my lens,
yes,
and this is my narrative that got me to here, but I am now going to stop and pause and take a breath and create a space.
And absolutely. And I don't think we can talk about common good without talking about Thomas Raymond and all the work he's doing on harm and good, social good, common good, whatever ways you want to use the word. But you know, we've got to have that in the conversation, and that wasn't, you know, there wasn't a lot of talk about harm in the book. There was some little threads, but there wasn't a lot. Yes. And I think it will, I loved Leanne talking about the intimacy of capitalism, and I'd love to read about that. I'd love to write about it, except I don't know where I would go, but, you know, Leanne. Yeah, like that's just mind-blowing, because you know, when we're talking about capitalism and when we're talking about materialism, I'm right in there. I'm right in there. You know, I'm absolutely believed in that all my whole life since I learned there was a possibility to think that way when I first went to study. And I think it's going to take a massive flip side, because the whole thing of neoliberalist capitalism is based on individual advancement. And it's based on treading on someone else's head in order to get there.
And kicking somebody else's head.
Yeah. So what is it going to take for us to focus on good, social good, common good, public good? You know, that'll be a revolution in its own right, in order to just get to somewhere where we can meet.
And I've been loving Liam's comments too. And Liam, of course, the ultra-realist criminologist, they're confronting a lot of challenges in the UK at the moment. And I'm not necessarily sure why. I've gone through Australian higher education particularly, and criminologists always say, oh, Tara, they're sexist. And that's like the end of the conversation. And it's like, you know, we've all got strengths and challenges in our ontological framework. Let's go with that. But as Maeve said, perhaps we need to deal with the fact of the normalisation of harm, and what the normalisation of harm has done. That we're going to go through life, and you know what, we may get COVID, may kill us, we may kill our grandmother, you know, stuff happens, you know, and people, and of course, those of you that know my wonderful Jess, my student Jess, she studied alcohol use and abuse in women, and basically women are going, yeah, I'm fine. They're drinking their own body weight in Chardonnay every day, but yeah, they're fine, right? And so the normalisation of harm may be a way to say, let's stop living like this and configure a common good. So really beautifully said. Of course, I'm conscious of times. A couple of other stops I'd like to go. One is, of course, and Ella, again, you and I might have a conversation on this, about social media and leftist critique. And of course, do we do even Elon Musk? I'm sort of following it. It's sort of like a train wreck, isn't it? Twitter at the moment is just like a train wreck. It's just like, can he do anything weirder? Yeah, nah, and then he does. And my favourite description of Elon Musk has been Space Karen. the Elon Musk is space, Karen, made me laugh. But Simon and Steve said, quote, social media platforms begin to resemble medieval courtyards in which dissidents could be punished with the full force of public shame and humiliation. So I wonder, Ella, if social media is now a blockage. It could be a disintermediated strategy so that we've got a new public sphere, a new common good, and all sorts of groups coming together. But Ella, it really does seem it's now doing that normalisation of harm, isn't it? So it's now a bullying environment. You got a vibe on social media and blocking the public good?
I think it's, I mean, I deleted my Twitter and then went, oh my gosh, what if Tara goes on Twitter? And then I went back on it. So anyway, just as a side note, but I think that when you think of the common good, for me, the thing that sticks out from everything you're talking about, normalization of harm, is there's a lot of grief and a lot of suffering, and people don't have a place to take it. You can't take your baggage to work. You can't take your baggage to your friends. You can't take it to your family. Where do you go? And so that's an outlet to go to. And because there's all of these arguments around regulation and or not and what you can say, people are just trying whatever they can and evolving because there's so much suffering. So I think that I don't know the answer, but I do think that it's a real concern. And the fact that there's proliferating now social media types and involvement is showing that people are desiring something else. But then I still think of neoliberalism as this amorphous blob that eats everything, and it's just going to come along and eat it like the marshmallow man. So it might be a bit doom and gloom.
No, but that's why you and I met. Because we're sort of old goths together, Ella. Don't you worry about that. You're a star. Aidan, where are you on the social media debacle? I stayed on Twitter. I know everyone was going there. They did the sort of announced they were leaving, and to be honest with you, I've never, I'm leaving now. Like, you're sort of like the Queen, and the Queen is I'm gone now. I love it. People announce that they're leaving. Like Elton John announced he was leaving Twitter. It's like, girlfriend, you're alive. You just finished your tour. Have a great life. You didn't have to tell us, right? You can just go, mate. You can just leave the car park. It's cool. But so I sort of stayed on just to watch this catastrophic endgame of hyper-capitalism and what occurs. And it's been great. It has been bread and circuses. But Aidan, I mean, is this about normalising harm? And have we got to bring social media down to calm the farm a bit?
I think lots of the social media space is it's very performative still. Like, even though it might be an outlet for a lot of people to kind of vent, it's like venting deliberately to be provocative or to, make statements that, virtue signal or, whatever it might be, however you might sort of configure that. It's really interesting to me to think of, losing one platform and gaining another, and the way that we've seen so much change in that space over 15 years or so, and I think lots of it is just about how I think there's that thing of if you're not buying something, then you're the product, and I think lots of it's that actually you're just drumming up drama for somebody else's ad revenue, basically, and I think having a healthier outlet for those things absolutely is necessary. We need to think about ways that we think about, ethical behavior and, respecting each other and the collective good. And I think actually getting to that root would be the solution, as opposed to worrying about the, the outcomes in the form of social media. So I don't know. I think it is an interesting train wreck, and it is a weird space, but yeah.
And Aidan, it seems very important to me that academics dig in and we commit to these spaces, and we perform is the wrong word because it's got that Baudrillard inflection, that we dig in and we enact, we be the change we want to see. So we demonstrate compassion, ethics, kindness, engage with nice dialogue, all that's interesting. And we actually configure what would be an online common good. What does online common good look like? And we perform that, because the consequences, if we don't, Aidan, is the influences take over, right? And do you want a world, what would be worse than a world run by Donald Trump. Well, you know, a world run by influencers going, let's do the contour powder once more. Okay, let's all do this, you know, and let's do the magnetic eyelashes. And I've seen more women put on magnetic eyelashes in the last year than I can human. And do we need to see this? So, Aidan, part of it is me going, you know what, let's dig in. Let's not lose the space. It's a war of position. Hegemony 101, it's a war of position. Let's not lose the space. Am I being naive and normalising risk myself?
Oh, a good question.
Go on.
I don't think you're being naive. I think there's tremendous potential there, and I know that these spaces provide, a wonderful outlet and a wonderful sense of community and a gathering space for many people. And I don't want to diminish that at all, but I'm also baffled by what people expect Twitter or Facebook to be. I mean, really, it's one, you've just traded one bunch of capitalists for another. It's what, I've never understood I'm also a bit baffled, by the investment in, and maybe it's because I just am not understanding and not, maybe taking it seriously enough and what it means to people. But to me, the idea that it is a public sphere, I found quite curious. Like, no, to me, it's not. It's really not. It's not a public sphere. It's just, to me, it's a space for the articulation of the individual 101, I think, and not that I have a problem with that. I don't think that's a problem, but I think that again, connecting back to capitalism is capitalism harmful. Capitalism is absolutely harmful, and harm is intimate. And in what space do we have the way in which to articulate that harm? And in capitalism, all we do is have a language of harm. So of course, people on Twitter are going to be bonkers. Of course, they're going to be harmful, because that is the language, that is the literacy with which we have learnt to articulate our intersection with capitalism.
Well said. And of course, Liam has also just said quite wonderfully in the chat, well, that's how we met each other. Most of us met each other through this disintermediated platform. And also, Leanne, as you know, I'm a cheap date. You've met my parents, and I'm a cheap date. And look, Twitter's free. Why wouldn't I be using it? And if some random's going to spend billions of dollars for it so I can use it for free,
yep,
loving that word. So, team, final conversation, and I've had a ball. I hope you've had a good evening, afternoon, morning, night, wherever you are. Alison stayed with us, you superstar. Liam stayed with us. But let's do the final comment about COVID, where the book in many ways finishes. Quote, neoliberalism is either about to give itself a major refit or implode, leaving a murky landscape strewn with rubble, real and metaphysical, in which as yet unknown forms of politics will come into being. Now, colleagues, to finish us off, do we think actually we have lost, as Leanne said, lost the opportunity of COVID to create a different type of system and structure and protocol? Have we lost that and we've gone back to a new normal? Or is there still an opportunity in and through COVID to remember what we've lost, remember what we can have, and do things differently? Aidan, do you want to start us off, bro?
Yeah, I think we're sort of still seeing the impacts, obviously. And I think, to me, the more grim that the economy looks and the more socially precarious everybody is, like all of these, compounding pressures that are really racking up, from, cost of living going up, power bills going up, like everything's getting more expensive, wages are going down, all these things, they lead to that, I guess, sort of general ambience of revolution. Basically, it's like I keep sort of waiting for like the blood vessel in your forehead to pop and people to just get out on the street and go, this is like, I can see now, this is wrong, we need to do something about it. Yeah. And I think I'm not seeing us turn back from that. Like we're just accelerating towards this, I don't know, dystopian hellscape at the end of this fast capitalist space. And really it's more and more as time goes by, I think we're edging towards a position where people can't ignore that the system that we're living in is the problem, and that these social conditions aren't working for us. Whether they agree about what they should look like or could look like is very much open for debate. But I think we are, again, entering a time and place where almost history repeating itself, you know, like Great Depression kind of time frame, where we're either going to end up with such exploitation that people are literally sort of reverted into slavery, or we have a total revolution and change the system. Whether we end up with something better, I guess, remains to be seen. But I think we can't sort of just let it keep going.
Yeah, and I've called this, in some of the work I'm doing at the moment, survival or survivorist capitalism. So we're just endlessly living and trying to survive in the present. And of course, I'm sort of living that at the moment. So, you know, I'm in temporary accommodation. I've been in temporary accommodation for a year. My entire life is in storage, and I'm paying somebody a huge amount of money to live in a very small place in this transitory fashion, not living anywhere. And of course, there are millions of people around the world that are living in Airbnbs or somebody else's subletted, you know, room under a stairwell. And as Aidan said, at what point do you just go, this present is really bad, I cannot do another day like this? Leanne, are you as optimistic as Aidan and I am that the revolution is coming?
No.
I knew you wouldn't be.
No, I'm not. I'm sorry. I think capitalism has been far too insidious and far too clever at recruiting people who would normally be out in the street. I think it's been incredibly seductive. And like, you know, if we go back to you as in your economic determinist framework, once upon a time, I wasn't so much. When I used to teach it, I used to always be like, oh, yeah, there are things outside the economy, guys. We've got to remember that. Today, if I was teaching that same course, I would not be making that argument. I'd be saying everything, absolutely everything is seduced by the marketplace. And I think also, you know, for me, I'm living with the lens of the global financial crash, you know. So I'm sorry, I'm a bit pessimistic and I'm a little bit cynical about the whole situation. And I think people still have too much to, what they perceive, they still have too much to gain from the status quo as it is. This idea that they can somehow enter into this and, you know, gain something from it, that there's still too much to gain. And I don't quite know how to frame that yet.
And of course, they have, we're all living on the bones of our arse, right? That's the unbelievable thing. May go straight in there.
Yes, I want to add to Leanne, what Leanne said. Sadly, I don't see a revolution. What I see is highly adaptive governments all around the world. And when the pandemic hit, what did they do? They did exactly what Winlow and Hall are talking about. They printed money, they created everything. Suddenly there was enough money in our country for unemployed people to get a living amount, a somewhat living amount to live on. Prior to that, there's no money. Now, there's no money. But in the middle, when there could have been a revolution, they very quickly adapted, they very quickly printed money, and they very quickly gave it to the people most likely to revolt. So I'm afraid that the intelligence of what we like to call, of the neoliberalist capitalist and the states, and also you've got to be thinking, you know, I know I immediately want to go to Elon Musk and his sink. You know, he's not going to keep Twitter free for you. He's going to put money on that. And then you're going to have to decide, will you be Twitter where you pay £12 a month, or will you be not? He's in there to make mega bucks and to screw us all over again.
See, I'm such a cheap date. I'll just hang in there while it's free, mate. I'll just hang in there while it's free. But I mean, it's a great point. And you've talked about the adaptability of this system. And I think and Aidan, that's all your research, can I say, brother? Your great work with Gramsci has reached its time, I think. Really, you're demonstrating that. A lot of my Alzerian work on ISAs, RSAs is now starting to become incredibly relevant. So colleagues, can I thank you incredibly, in the middle of the night, afternoon, early mornings. Leanne, thank you for joining so early from Perth. I thank you for being a part of this discussion. I feel like I've changed in the last hour. I'm thinking differently about the world because of you. And I thank you for your expertise, and I thank you for your time. You are wonderful, wonderful humans. Have a lovely rest of the day. Alison, sleep well, darling.
Thank you for organising, Tara, and thanks everyone for your contributions.
Thank you.
Good luck, Nick. Good luck, and see some of you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Go on, you mate. You're a